I'm Elizabeth Brei. I'm an editor at IDW and the editor of Sleeping Beauties.
And I'm Triona Farrell. I'm the colorist of Sleeping Beauties, and I work for various companies in the US. I currently live in Dublin, Ireland.
I'm Alison Sampson. I'm drawing Sleeping Beauties, and at the moment that's all I'm doing. And previous to this, I've drawn a horror book called Winnebago Graveyard, and a few other things, and some stuff for Image, and Sleeping Beauties at the moment, and I'm following a script written by Ryall Ewers, who can't be here today, but like he's also a really big part of this, and he sends his apologies, and yeah, and I'm going to mute myself again now.
Hi, I'm Chris Ryall. I'm the former publisher and other roles at IDW. Just stepped aside a couple months ago, but prior to that, I helped work with Stephen and Owen King to bring Sleeping Beauties to IDW, and then helped assemble the team. And now the team is doing amazing things every month on the comic.
I am Bucky. I usually describe myself as a non-binary amorphous blob, but I used to be a retailer up until late last year when I had to sadly close my shop. But other than that, I am a kind of comics connoisseur and someone just trying to make the world of comics a bit of a better place.
And I'm Jen King, American retailer, and a big fan of everything that Stephen and his family have written, and have been following this book very closely. So let's get started with a discussion about this awesome series. Probably where we should start is, Chris, how did IDW approach the Kings? The Kings approached IDW.
I approached them. I'd worked with Stephen a bit in the past. I adapted a short story that he wrote with his other son, Joe Hill. They did a story called Throttle that I adapted to comics. And so we talked along the way about doing different adaptations, and he had mostly held off just because his schedule had been so hectic that he couldn't really put the time forth in being the person overseeing all aspects of the comic development. But Owen said he really wanted to do this one. So Stephen said, yeah, if you can sort of bear the day-to-day burden of approvals and all of that, like, yeah, let's do it. And so he's been, from the start, a cheerleader of seeing this thing happen. And along the way, he's been raving every issue about the artwork and the colors and the job everybody's been doing. And so it just sort of started that easily. It was them saying, yes, let's do it. And then Owen was much more instrumental in working with the adapter, an author named Ryall Ewers, and Elizabeth on figuring out how to adapt the story to comics and what to do, what parts to excise, what parts to build up, and some changes to be made for the comic and all of that. So that's really where it fell into Elizabeth's hands, and Elizabeth has done this masterful job shaping it into sequential comics.
So I've been doing some, I didn't get to read the novel, but I've been starting the audiobook, and it's 25 hours of straight dialogue, and it's so wonderful and beautiful. But I would like to know, how in the world did Ryall and Elizabeth break that down into a comic book sized pacing when it's such a giant world and so many characters?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. I came to it from a kind of weird position because I hadn't read the source material before I started editing it. And I think that actually gave me a really interesting entry point into the material, because I had kind of a basic summary of what the story was and the story beats that we needed to hit, but wasn't as kind of held to what happens in the novel. So that source material, it's a hefty book, Owen, very, very lovely. He's so lovely, but he sent me a copy of the book so that I had one, and that was really nice of him. But it takes some time to get through it. So yeah, there's a lot of material there that really builds out this lovely and very mythology driven story that of course can all go into a 10-issue comic. So we had to make some choices about which characters weren't going to make it into each issue and really make it a much more intimate story. And it's still like got a huge ensemble cast, but it's really focused in on a very, I'm so sorry, my screen just bounced. My cats are running across the table it's on. But yeah, it's really focused on a very tight group of people in a very small area. And that's been fun because it's made this story that literally is worldwide. And this is a thing happening all over the world in the story into a really nice, neat package. But the dialogue has been really interesting because Ryall is a prose writer by trade. So this was his first time writing a comic book. I think he's done an amazing job. His scripts are some of my favorite I've ever read just because he writes like a prose writer. So he's very verbose has a negative connotation, but that's kind of the word I'm thinking of, that he's very interested in giving as much to Alison to draw as possible, but also really getting into the meat of the dialogue and using we've been kind of using captions in interesting ways. I'm not usually one for using dialogue captions, but it's given the story a really cinematic feel to do it that way, because we can use them over different situations, giving it kind of a montage effect. So the combination of people talking a lot, like there are people having to explain this very intense and complex situation, while also really getting into the specific horror that can come from the idea of people just going to sleep and not waking up. Yeah, it's been a challenge because it is very dense material. But it's also it's a King book, so it's really easy to dig into and have a good time with.
The one other part of that, if I could just add to that, when I was first talking to Ryall about adapting this, is the thing about, like, when you adapt somebody like Stephen King, is you really have to try to get over feeling presumptuous about the edits you make, because you start going, well, I don't necessarily have to include that part, and this part maybe isn't all that relevant for the comic. And then the first thing you're seized by is this panic of like, well, who the hell am I to decide what parts of a Stephen King or Owen King novel belong, in or out of the story? And so that was the thing I was really trying to sort of coach Ryall on, is it's okay. Like, they understand that you need to adapt to the proper medium and tell the story in the right way. They're not precious about their material in that way, which is great. They encourage you taking the story that they wrote and then making it into what you need for the comic. But that's really the first part of it, is just that panic of like, who am I to be cutting their words? But once you get over that, then you can sort of start telling your own story.
Yeah, I think that was part of why I was a little bit glad that I hadn't read the book before we started editing the scripts too, is because I didn't feel quite as intimidated by that idea. And Owen definitely helps because he works on us day to day and is just totally down for whatever we want to do, which is amazing in this kind of situation and very unusual. But yeah, it's been fun to, Ryall will make a choice that maybe doesn't make sense to me as a non-reader of the book, and I can ask that question, and that lets us consider whether or not a character needs to appear right there if we haven't seen them before, or if we can find a way to to make that role fit with somebody else. And yeah, it's been a really fun experience editing something like this without having a really strong understanding of the source material outside of like what the plot is. Things need to happen in it. Yeah, and I want to sing Owen praises too a little bit more. I think like Chris said, the Kings are not precious about this, and I'm really impressed with them, I guess, because of that. Because I think if anybody could be like, this is my work and it has to be like if I had it initially and how I expect it, it's probably Stephen King, you know, and they've been really open to us adapting and trying new things. And that's been awesome.
Like, just to add to that, I always think of that there's so many Stephen King himself has had so many adaptations of his work over the years that I imagine this is almost just like it's second nature in a way, where like definitely just especially when it comes to comics, you have so little room within the panels to kind of get everything in that you have to be very precious about like what you put in yourself, because otherwise like I don't want to say you're like tearing it down to the bare bones, but like being just very aware of like, well, obviously I can't get all these characters into one panel. How can I manage this but the story is still coherent?
Yeah, I think that's been really interesting because Rio writes really dense panels. I think we keep losing Alison, but I really want to. I really want to kind of hear how she feels about Rio's writing, because yeah, there are so many people who have to appear on the page that can be really hard to draw. So I think Alison's done a really good job of finding a balance of like getting the things on the page that need to happen, and also maybe knowing where she can like lose a character, but they can appear a moment later to actually do what they need to do there. And her pages are so incredibly like packed with things that are happening, and it's been, I think,
the amount of information and characters and movement she conveys just on this spread alone is immense. Hope her signal allows her back on soon so she can talk about the visual approach, because it's really stunning. The storytelling is really smart and interesting. And oh, there's Alison. So yeah, I mean, I think you and Tree are doing the heavy lifting and making this thing so visually appealing. So I think that's what everybody should hear, is how you're approaching it.
Think you and Tree are doing the heavy lifting and making this thing so visually appealing. So I think that's is how you're approaching it.
Well, the way of approaching it, I mean, Rio has written these really complicated scripts, and I'm generally trying to just follow that, and I'm very aware of how much editing has gone on already, and really it's a technical challenge to get everything in, and if we can make it look good, that's a plus. And it's really, really cool to draw, and we're trying to do an awful lot here. This book was not written to be a comic, so there's no gifts, there's no page budget or anything, and it's a lot of stuff to draw. So it's fine. I mean, yeah.
I'm going to very quickly dive in here. Alison, that was pretty much inaudible. So I mean, I think I may be able to trim where the signal drops out and make it vaguely coherent. But your signal has just deteriorated, and there she goes.
Okay.
You scared her away, Leonard.
I feel bad because she put all of this together, and
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it possible to come back at this like another day when her headphones are charged and you know?
We could suggest that. The only thing I would say is also her signal is permanently crap.
Okay. All right.
To the point where I asked for her like just the speed test results, and when she was embarrassed to tell me, that speaks volumes.
Okay. Is it possible to just have her on as just audio?
That's what I'm going to suggest. Well,
Yeah.
she's back here now.
My phone melted down. It
Okay.
my phone shut off because it was overheating, which I don't really know about that one. That one's new to me.
Tell you what,
yeah,
while
just
the phone
keep
is
me on
still
audio.
working, okay. I'm going to come off. Answer the question again.
What was the question?
I think it was just
somebody
really
asked me something.
your approach to the art and how you brought it to life visually, how you pack everything into so many characters into every page.
Oh, I thought I answered that. Okay. Yeah. It's a massive challenge. Our main state that we just don't have enough. So I sit down and I design it, and sometimes when I can't fit things in, I put in a smaller panel to explain that. I mean, to be really honest, I add more panels.
Yeah,
I add more panels in this comic than I've added in any other comic, which is largely to explain myself. And Rio has got the script to a point, and then we're taking it to another point with our design work, and that's kind of great. Actually, it's nice to contribute in that way and be given that space to do that. But Jen here is also in the comic as one of the people. We have I don't know how many people, maybe 100 characters to fit in. So they're all based on real people, and and that's.
I think Jen's the only one I saw that I actually recognized. I was pretty excited about it.
Yeah.
I was
Jen,
like,
what was your experience of being a character? I don't know if you could hear this.
The only one I saw that
So my experience has been kind of interesting because Alison gives such great screen direction when she wants something that she's going to use as inspiration for her art. So she gave me basically like from over shoulder shot, and my husband and I had so much fun. I think we took like 120 pictures and sent them off. But it's so funny because I play a prisoner, and I have a criminal justice degree, and I actually did my internship in a maximum women's security prison. So I actually am familiar with what's going on in this book. I've actually seen it firsthand, what it looks like, and it's done very well. It's really what it is like in those kinds of facilities. So the research was done very well. It looks really genuine, and it's been a blast to do. I'm interested in seeing what happens next for sure.
I really love. I really love.
I don't know if you die, by the way.
Oh yeah, I do, but I won't say anything. But yeah, I really love the setting of the women's prison as a place where there are a lot of women all together in this really weird situation with this illness that is just affecting women. And there's probably no other space exactly like that in the world, except for maybe like a convent where you'd find lots of women all together, and a convent would probably be, well, maybe not less interesting. Maybe that's like a one shot in the future or something. How did a convent handle the Aurora sickness? But yeah, this idea, there's a lot of oh no, yeah, everybody's. I just saw Leonard's thing that I'm breaking up, but you know the kind of themes about women being the better part of the world, you know, that men need the feminine, like all of those kinds of questions and considerations in the story are really kind of turned on their head a little bit when you're in a prison with women who have committed violent crimes, particularly. Yeah, it's really cool to spend time in there. And I think Alison's characters and Rio's writing of the characters for the comic it's been really intense and interesting.
So
I guess it's worth really. I'm sorry, Jen. Go ahead.
I'd love to hear from Bucky about their perspective, because I'm a huge fan of yours. I don't know in person, but I, from afar, a very huge fan of yours. And your opinion means a lot to me. I'd love to hear your perspective.
So it was quite interesting for me going in because I struggled with the book. I tried to listen to the audiobook and I could not get into it. I found it a little bit too dense. I mean, my books of choice are what my other half calls complete trash, which probably says a lot as to why I couldn't read maybe an actually good book. But the comics for me were so much more accessible. It pared down a lot of the stuff that I struggled with listening to the audiobook. And another thing I found super, super helpful was we were talking amongst ourselves about the color and stuff and the use of color in this book. And for a story that goes to different kind of collections of characters, I found the use of color changing just like it really made it so much easier to follow, because a lot of the different settings would have kind of specific color palettes, which again for me is one of the reasons I love comics, because you have these kind of extra little almost clues when you're reading that can help tie stuff together. So I found it a lot more accessible, the comics for me, which I think again could be a good thing, you know, from a reader perspective, that, you know, even if you're a fan of well, any of the King's kind of properties, but you get some people that just like the movies, like just really like It or The Shining, or, you know, that come in through that maybe haven't read the books. Comics are a way that they can get a bit more of that kind of King literature without perhaps having to look at these huge hefty books. So I found it a lot more accessible and enjoyable, definitely, being able to read the comics. And I did like the inclusion of mentioning trans and non-binary people as well, because when I initially started reading it, I was like, how are you gonna, like, is this gonna be mentioned or just glossed over? Or but the fact it was mentioned, I was like, that's really cool. And it's not like a throwaway, it's like a good, like, big old page that mentions it and shows the people in the cocoons and everything. So I thought that was good, even just to kind of acknowledge it as something that's happening in universe. And I'm quite interested, actually. I don't know if that was mentioned in the book as well, or if that's something that the creative team have expanded on.
So that part was really interesting because it's not in the book, but Owen and Stephen both acknowledged that was an oversight of theirs when they were writing. And it was really important to both of them that we include that, an acknowledgement that does complicate the narrative a little bit when you're not necessarily working on a gender binary. So Rio wrote this lovely page that, and Alison drew it beautifully, to consider that a little bit. And I believe Chris worked with Max Visaggio to
just to make sure it was handled in a sensitive and acceptable manner. because again, yeah, we want to make sure that we are representing the proper point of view in the proper way. And so we reached out to Mags and another writer to sort of take a look and make sure that from their point of view that it was handled properly as well.
Yeah, I think you can tell. It feels like it doesn't feel like it's in there to score points. It feels like it's in there out of a genuine place of like, hey, we're going to address this, and we're doing it properly. And we've kind of had people read it and check that everything is kind of as it should be. So it was definitely appreciated, even just from my personal kind of non-binary perspective.
Alison has something to add.
Also, what we're doing is, and this is really a personal thing from me, is I have some friends who had, well, not only do we want to mention trans and non-binary people in the book, we also want to draw them as well. And I want to just have them in the book around just doing that, having their lives and so on. So scattered through the book, there are people who've come in to be part of the story, and this is kind of quite meaningful to them to be included, where just to be part of whatever definitions in the story we have, that they are there. And quite a lot of the work I do is like this, where, as I say, it's with individuals. And there's usually, in most of the work I do, there's some kind of other individual meaning with this. So, yeah, I mean, shout out to Keys and Will here. It's like, thank you for being in the book. And yeah, as I say, it isn't just mentioned, people are there as well. And that was what I wanted to say. Anyway, I'll mute myself again now.
I was going to mention something that I thought of when I started reading, was that I really expected the mood and tone to be a lot like The Stand, which it is, because The Stand has got a whole bunch of fantasy that's interspersed in it. But this is the first time I've read a book of Stephen's and Owen's that I didn't feel like, like I usually say, oh, that could really happen. This is one of the first one I've read that is like, I can read this as fantasy, because I don't feel like when you have like a very clear antagonist in the Avon lady, who's very evil, and but the characters themselves are so like, these people are real. They all feel very real to me, like Lila and her role as the sheriff, and like the poor family that's got definite problems and issues, and their daughter Nana gets cocooned. It's all like real human drama. Beautiful.
Yeah, I think the different kinds of characters, and this book coming out when it did has been really interesting, because I mean, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and that's what's happening in the book. And even though it's a fantasy pandemic that affects a very specific part of the population, I think the panic and grief is all really easy for people to look at and see in their real lives. And that was kind of unintentional, because when we started this, it wasn't happening yet. This book was originally supposed to come out in April, and that of course didn't happen because comics shut down for a minute. But yeah, so we've been working on it since late last year, and the really human parts of it, I think, are part of what people are really connecting with when reading it, is that it's a story about a world shutting down in a lot of ways, and these very specific stories about these characters who are handling it in different ways, some better than others, is it's weirdly apropos.
Well, that and the idea of a society that is run by men that devolves into chaos in the book is being borne out every day of our lives, it seems, too. So it feels relevant in that way as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I was going to ask myself, as I was genuinely curious, like even the way that the countries have handled the pandemic, has that impact? It felt you impacts the writing, or the way that kind of the approach the book in a way, just given that it is about a pandemic that kind of affects a certain amount of the population.
Yes, it's crazy to me because so many of the scripts, because Ryall writes very quickly and he got very ahead. Most of the scripts are written before the pandemic started, so some of them feel like a little bit like he predicted the future.
Spooky.
So, like we're working on issue 5 right now, and the first page is just kind of a montage of people posting on Facebook about what's going on. And the first one is like a person making a completely bonkers claim about, this being contagious and it being spread through the cocoons, and this came from the CDC, and of course it's total like fake news, like copy and paste this if kind of thing that you see on Facebook all the time. And we all saw that stuff when the pandemic started. I think it's slowed down a little bit, but yeah, between that and then like people talking about, killing women to keep it from spreading, and then other people wanting to defend the women, and like all of that is like, it felt so weirdly real to see that.
Yeah, because I think if you were to kind of, there's certain aspects of that book, if you were to give it to me maybe about 2 or 3 years ago, I'd be like, this is a bit unrealistic. And then, having lived through a pandemic, and you certainly do get some opinions online about certain things that people, they're like, none of my wildest dreams would I assume they kind of say those sort of things, but here we are in 2020, so.
Yeah.
Yes, Alison. Yes, Alison.
I mean, a bunch of this is a bunch of it was drawn pre-pandemic, and it is a very strange feeling to draw something and then see it come to pass. Like, for example, the riots at the White House. When I drew that, there was no reference. There'd been no riots at the White House. I had to have a guess. I couldn't even tell what the White House looked like. Because there was no pictures of how close people got, and there was so much I didn't know. And then I drew it, and then it happened, and then I feel slightly, I won't say like I feel slightly like the book is cursed, but it's like I'm kind of hoping that it's not going to continue like that, and it's very sort of disconcerting, this kind of draw, and then it happens thing. I'm not, yeah. We'll just keep going and just keep our fingers crossed, I guess, that we don't curse anything else.
So we're currently only have issue 3 out in the States, and I know the novel's really long. What is the plan for how many issues for this series for IDW?
10, yeah. Yeah, for now. The main story will be told in 10 issues. So yeah, we're just a third of the way through. It feels wild because we've been so entrenched in it for so many months now, to know that there's still quite a lot to go. And it's just even as so there's okay, everyone's back. Sorry, everyone disappeared for me for a second. Yeah, so it's we've been working on the scripts for so long now that we keep getting to the art and I'm like, oh, this happens in this issue. And that's kind of a wild thing to realize, that we still have so much to do, and it's gonna be really fun, and everything gets much wilder and more violent as it goes. And as I think everyone here knows, Alison drawing violence is really incredible. And
yeah,
I just have to say too, like, Trina's color palette on this has been so amazing. And I think it's really like, yeah, it's really, it really colored literally the way that the book works. It's so vibrant. Triona, I guess, do you want to talk about like your color choices here and why you're doing what you're doing?
Yeah, Bucky, when they were saying just about how it puts a lot of the book in perspective, where like that really was kind of like almost location by location I was going. But when it comes to like Alison's colors or like coloring Alison's work, I think that like you can't really take like a standard approach because there's so much going on. That you kind of you more need to break things down into just considering the page as a whole. So I'm never too concerned about like what's happening panel by panel. I'm more concerned what's happening kind of page by page in a way. Now compared to like what I did previously with I was on Hit Girl by Mark Miller with the Miller World series, and I was just saying earlier that like this was that book was like was far more wild, I think, than Sleeping Beauties. Like I just like, you know, I just kind of was breaking rules. I was like, oh, I don't need to color inside the panels, it's fine. You know, like it just kind of was very loosey and goosey. But like in this approach, I think it was a bit more restrained. But I feel that kind of like you know, as things become a bit more wild, I like to kind of break sort of the rules a bit more, considering like what's going on. And the kind of when I approach it, and I think when I was first presented with it and I was kind of shown this kind of blue butterfly cover, and I was kind of thinking that's how we're gonna do it. We're gonna like screw red being like the dangerous color. We're gonna have blue be this dangerous kind of this dangerous color that I think blue is a bit more natural in a way. Like I think it connects with the earth a bit more. And if you're to tell me, I don't want to say blue being more feminine, but if you were to kind of tell me this kind of dangerous undercurrent of pandemic and this dangerous undercurrent of kind of like of women being this women and kind of women-esque people being this sort of conduit in a way, I think blue really matches with that. So that's what I was thinking, and not just a kind of like a standard kind of sky blue, like this kind of royal azure blue as well is what I wanted to get across. So it's really fantastical in that way. And there's also like there's kind of I think a bit of grounding as well. Like you have a lot more warm colors that sort of ground us a little bit in reality, and even just like just going place by place as well, where there's just different, there's a lot of different characters and things, and I'm a great believer in kind of character matching, just keeping things kind of readable for readers as well, because like you were saying earlier, Bucky, about like it's a very dense book, it's an incredibly dense book, and I think if you were to kind of go by it like standard coloring of like you know the grass is green and the sky is blue, blah blah blah, that you could get very lost in like what's happening. So having everyone has like their standard color palette, so you can look at a glance of like who they are. And there's a lot of you know, kind of like the prison is one color, and then when we're going to the more fantastical forest-esque bits, you kind of tend to strain to kind of come to more the bluish sort of fantastical colors. But yeah, it's been an experience, but I definitely like that's kind of my first thoughts. I when it comes to coloring, I tend to kind of look at the material a little bit around it, and I tend to go like what's going to be my main color that I'm going to structure everything around it. And blue, that azure blue is what I wanted.
I think we're coming up against our time allotment. Anyone have any final thoughts?
Yeah, people should go and pick up the book. Support your local comic shop. You know, shops have been doing a lot of good work, sending out books by post and stuff, and people need to go and pick up their pull orders and order our comic book, and that will help your local shop. And then hopefully there'll be more comic shops, and then more comics sold in them as well. So no, and thank you for reading our comic. We work hard on it, and it's really, well, yeah, there's an awful lot gone into it, so we hope people look at it, and thank you very much.
Yeah, I just want to second that. this team has been such a joy to work with, and I'm just going to say that Alison has been carrying the heaviest load, and but everyone she's doing amazing, and everyone is doing amazing, and I am so excited. This book has been such a fun team effort, and it's probably the most collaborative comic I've worked on in a while, with everyone bringing their own special talents and points of view to the table. And yeah,
I think it's everyone's really bringing their A game with this, quite honestly. I want to say I'm bringing my A game for the most part, but that everyone for the most part is really invested. And I feel that especially given the current climate, this is a comic that you really want to have, because I think that it's almost prophetic in a way, the way that kind of we approach things. And even the way that kind of we handle social media and thing, and as always, just kind of support your local comic book shops. It's so important, especially going on at the moment. But yeah, I think it's really something special that you want to have, like a really collaborative, interesting thing that ties in what's going on right now.
Yeah, I guess I would sum it up with the same thing: is that the comic is just otherworldly beautiful, and it in print even more so. And then Elizabeth has lined up these amazing cover artists on the books as well. So yeah, I'd support your local comic stores and enjoy the book, because it's an amazing output from everybody involved.
I'll just add, from an ex-retailer perspective, not only obviously support your local comic shop. I see people all the time that say, "But I haven't got one. I don't live near one." That's fine. Pretty much all of them do mail order, especially at the moment. So just pick one that you like the look of, or that you've heard good things about, and put in a mail order with them. That's anywhere, I'm pretty sure, will do that. And also, if you are the sort of person who's indifferent between single issues and graphics, just get the single issues, please, because I think it can be a little bit of a secret that the single issue sales are actually a really big deal. So if you can get the single issues, go for that over the graphic. If you're extra awesome, get both. But yes, please buy the comic. It's very, very good, and pick it up from your local comic book shop.
I also just want to, go in there too about the single issues. Chris mentioned the covers, but there are 3 covers for each issue, and they're all gorgeous. The first 5 issues have Annie Wu covers, and this was my first time convincing her to work with me. So I really would love everyone to have all of those covers, because they're beautiful, and I think she really nailed the feel of the comic. Oh, this is one of Jen Woodall's covers, and she did all of the B covers. So she's
and Peach,
and of course Peach Momoko, who is a rising star and has
incredible,
just killing it. And I'm so happy that we got
Annie
covers. So yeah, single issues are where you can find all of those. So you'd be missing out anyway if you skipped out on the single issues. So
all right, everybody, I will see you in issue number 4 as my giant 6-foot whatever prisoner self. I hope to see you in future issues dying a horrible death.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you so much. That was great.